Okay, this video is on Chapter 5, Section 4, Fractions, Decimals, and Percents, they're simply notational systems for writing numbers, and they're all kind of interchangeable, so we're going to talk a little bit about what they mean, and then how to convert from one to another, like from fractions to decimals, decimals to fractions, decimals to percents, percents to decimals, fractions to percents, and percents to fractions. There's a little flow chart at the bottom of page 112 that is very helpful. Just call your attention to that. You should look at it. I'll kind of summarize the information. I'm not going to draw it up here, but you can take a look at it in your book. It gives you everything except how do you go from a fraction to a percent, which will be one of the first things I talk about in a couple of minutes about in the starts converting. But I want to just remind you that fractions, decimals, and percents are used to represent how part of something compares to the whole thing. The whole thing is 100% or 1, and you obviously know that there are fractions that are greater than 1. So sometimes you have to overcome one of the language issues that we're taught to think that the part is always less than the whole, and it usually is. It kind of makes sense. Well, if you're talking about part of something, it must be less than the whole. But in mathematics, that's not always true, and I think you'll see why in a minute. So we're going to define the whole thing as being 1, or 100%. So if we're talking about a pizza, the whole thing is 100%, it's 1 pizza. And percent means out of 100. So we keep reminding you of that idea throughout our study of percents, that percent means out of 100. And if you get that, sometimes when you're confused about what to do, that will help you to remember that you're always comparing to something out of 100. So if you make 25 shots out of 100, then you're shooting 25% because percent means out of 100. And that the whole thing is 100%. So let this rectangle represent one whole thing. So that also represents, since it's 1, it must be 100%. So this is 100% of the rectangle. And if I divide it into 2 parts, 2 equal parts, if the whole thing is 100%, then half of it, is the fraction, must be equal to half of 100, or 50%. And we know 1/2 also equals 5/10. So as a decimal, it would be 5/10. So there I have all 3 notational systems, a fraction, percent, and decimal. And we're going to learn how to go from one to the other. If I divide it into 4 equal parts, I'm basically splitting the 100% into 4 equal parts, so each one would be 25, 25, 25, 25. So it's 25%, which shows that 1/4 is the same as 25%, which would be 0.25. So what happens if I draw another rectangle that's exactly the same, congruent to this one? If this was 100%, then this is also 100%, so together they must make 200%. And if you think about this definition of the part comparing to the whole, now I'm actually saying the part is 2 of these, this is the whole thing, and the part I'm talking about is 2 of them. Kind of doesn't make sense, but that's the way you have to think about parts sometimes in our definition of percent. And when we start calculating percent based on like what's 16 out of 25, what is 26 out of 25, sometimes the part, when we talk about percents, can be greater than the whole, and you kind of have to get over that idea that the part is always less than the whole. It usually is, but not always. Okay, let's go to how do we convert things from, let's say, from a fraction to a percent. 3/4, there's a couple of ways to do that, and in your book, look at the examples, you'll see 2 ways that are common to change a fraction to a percent. You'll also notice the flowchart doesn't give you, because it's too lengthy to just put in that little flowchart. If you remember that percent means out of 100, you can use the kind of skill that we've been polishing up in previous lessons, and that is to use proportions. To say that 3:4, the same way something is to 100, and you'll directly get the answer, it'll be a certain percent. You can use equal fractions here and say 4 times 25 gives you 100, so 3 times 25 will give you 75, and you can simply put a percent sign there with it. It'll always be, if you say it's out of 100, then the number that you get here, and it might be a whole number or it might be a decimal number, will be the actual percent. The other way to do this kind of problem, and I should caution you that sometimes you will get a whole number. If you did something like 1/3, you would get you get 33.3 repeating if you use proportions to solve that one. So you just have to say it's 33.3% and put a little bar over that, 33.3 repeating. The other way to do this is to interpret this bar as a division bar and just transfer it to the division bracket. But remember that the denominator is the divisor here. So you're doing 4 into 3, which goes 0 times, but don't stop there. Put a decimal point next to 0. Bring the decimal point straight up. How many 4s are in? Now you can, if you've done this, you're good to go. You can think of this as 4 into 30, which goes 7 times. Remainder 2. Keep going until you don't get a remainder, or until you see that it repeats. And now we're done. Except that we haven't talked yet about how to change a decimal to a percent, so that's going to come up pretty soon. Maybe I should just go ahead and do that right now. And this is in your flowchart. To change a decimal to percent, you multiply the decimal number by 100, get your answer, and put a percent sign after it. Or another way to say that is move the decimal 2 places to the right and put a percent sign there. Because when you multiply by 100, it's the same as moving the decimal 2 places to the right. So, just to review fractions, you can either set up a proportion with a fraction equal to n over 100, or you can divide the denominator into the numerator. If you do denominator into numerator, you're going to end up with a decimal number, and you have to know how to change that to a percent. So let's go ahead and look at decimals to percents. I already told you the rule, move the decimal 2 places to the right and put a percent sign in. So you have 0.19, that would be 19%. Move the decimal 2 places to the right, put a percent sign in. If you have 0.382, a little trickier, but just follow the same idea, multiply it by 100 and put a percent sign in. 38.2%. If you have 5.91, follow the same rule, multiply it by 100, 591, and put a percent sign after it. That's it. So this is sort of an easier version because you always like it when it comes out to look so clean, but you might have a decimal in your percent, or you might have more than 100%. Those are numbers that exist. So we've done decimal to percent. How about a percent to a fraction? That's pretty easy to do. If you have 18%, and remember that means out of 100, you just write it as 18 out of 100. That's the most straightforward kind, but you then get these other kind, like you might have 621%, and that's 621 out of 100. So you have the improper fraction. You have to do, how many hundreds are in 621? There would be 6 and 21 left over. And then this happens to be lowest terms, but it might not be. So you might have to change this improper fraction to a mixed number, and sometimes you might have to reduce this fraction that results. Or you could have 0.8%. And this is maybe the trickiest of all. That's going to be 0.8 out of 100. And technically that's not a fraction, because fractions have to have whole numbers in numerator and denominator. So you have to do a little bit of adjusting on this one. But remember, you can multiply both parts of a fraction by the same number and get an equal fraction. So if you multiply both by 10, it's going to slide that decimal over and make it an 8 out of 1,000, which is what that would be. Then you have to divide them both by 4. No, 8 goes into 1,000, so it would be 1 over 125. Divide 8 into 8, 8 into 1,000, and you get 1 over 125. So when you're changing a percent to a fraction, just remember that percent means out of 100. That reminder that percent means out of 100 can help you convert percent to fraction. Let's see, did we do percent to decimal? I think we did. Did we do decimal to a percent? No, we didn't do a percent to decimal yet. 81%. You follow the opposite rule of decimal to a percent, where we move the decimal, we multiply by 100. Here we have to divide by 100. So we would move the decimal here would be behind the 1 if we showed it. So we're going to move it 2 places to the left. I want to put a 0 in here. And drop the percent sign. So we're kind of thinking reverse from what we did when we went from here to here. When we went percent, or from a decimal to a percent, we multiplied by 100 and attached a percent symbol. When we go from percent to a decimal, we divide by 100 and drop the percent symbol. So 9% would be, move the decimal 2 places. Well, there's 1, what are we going to do now? Because we have to have another space. When you're thinking, put a 0 there, you'd be right. That doesn't change the value of 9%. But when we write it as a decimal, we need that 0 in there. Because we're going to move this 2 places to the left and drop the percent sign. So 9% is 9 hundredths, and let's make sense of that. Percent means out of 100. This means 9 out of 100, which is 9 hundredths, and that's 9 hundredths. So always kind of think, is my answer making sense with what I know about decimal numbers and percents? So let's see, what else might come up here? 8.3% could come up. So here we're going to, again, move the decimal 2 places to the left. So we have to annex a 0 again. It'd be 0. Excuse me. 0.083. So we got to slide this decimal 1 place and 2 places and need another 0 there. Well, 9% is really close to 8.3%, and these answers are pretty close together. How about 394%? So the decimal would be here. We move it 2 places to the left, and it goes between the 3 and the 9. 3.94. And you know, thinking again that 100% means 1. So this is close to 400%, so it should be close to 4. And 3.94 is close to 4. So that's our lesson on fractions, decimals, and percents.